Welcome to a new edition of the Famous Interviews with Joe Dimino. On this episode, we talk with Kansas City-based author and photographer Regina Daniel. She specializes in urban exploration photography as the owner and operator of Red Vixen Photography. Covering much of the Kansas City area and the surrounding vicinities, she has gone on to travel through 6 states in the Midwest doing her abandoned photography. What started out as curiosity for the abandoned has turned into documenting the forgotten or lesser-known history lessons and photographing what has stood the test of time. That change from curiosity to preservation led her to write the Abandoned Kansas City book series, Abandoned Eastern Kansas, and Abandoned Picher, Oklahoma. Regina's passion to photograph the abandoned will continue to have a driving force as long as progression continues to leave old and obsolete behind for better and brighter tomorrows. She's got a great story. We are excited to get into it. Enjoy this interview. Regina, it's great to meet and see you again. Thank you for taking a minute out today. I appreciate it.
Well, thank you for having me. I appreciate this opportunity to talk about one of my favorite neighborhoods.
You know, the interesting thing is that, so I went down and my mother-in-law bought the book. It was wonderful to delve into it more. She loved it. And the thing that's interesting is that I had no idea that I was going to run into you. I had no idea that I was going to get into this whole realm of like these evacuated places around Kansas City. It's such a fascinating thing. I'm just kind of setting this up a little bit so everybody understands before we get into you and how this idea came to birth. So kind of lay out a little bit in kind of a condensed version in the beginning of what exactly are you doing with looking into these places in Kansas City that are so fascinating?
Basically, what I do is I take pictures of these abandoned places all over the metro area, and then I research their histories and I write about their stories because one day, and actually quite a few of these are already gone, but most of these, if not all of these, will be gone one day because we're such a city on the uprise.
Well, and that's evidence with everything that's going on. You know, we're going to get the World Cup. We got the draft. It's like all of a sudden, Kansas City is this epicenter, and there's so many of these places that people see and don't know anything about. So, you know, I noticed the fur place down by
Like
Majestic, and yeah. So let's go to the beginning here. Let's start at the Alpha and let's work our way up. Talk to me a little bit about your history. Are you a native of Kansas City?
I am. I was born and raised on the Wyandotte side, and then right before high school, I moved to Missouri.
So what initially got you sparked on these very interesting places around town?
It all started in 2014. I saw this Netflix show called Forgotten Planet, and the first episode was about Pripyat, Ukraine, and Picher, Oklahoma. And I got into looking into Picher, Oklahoma, and it's like, hey, you know, that's only like 2 hours from here. Let's go see what a ghost town is like. I went down merely as a curious spectator to see what a ghost town was all about. And that's when I was bit by the bug, and I started just researching places up here, and one place led to another, and now I have like a small network of friends that we all work together to find these places and document them in our own way.
And you document it so well, and you are a photographer as well as a writer. Talk to me a little bit about what you do in kind of your Renaissance mode.
It's all about, I have such serious FOMO, like fear of missing out on so many places because, you know, I can't get it all. But when I'm there, I, you know, document everything that I can think that would help me tell this story visually to go along with the words that are, you know, just merely this place's history.
So when you really got the bug to do this, what were some places? What was kind of your first list of places around Kansas City that you wanted to document and get into a book?
I didn't have any set places per se. Like I didn't set out to, oh, I want to get, you know, such and such place. It was more like, what's abandoned? What can we get into that we don't have to break into? And, you know, just telling the stories actually came after like the pictures, because at first it was just about photographing abandoned places, and then it's like, what are these places really about? And that's when I started discovering these just little historic stories that make up the greater collective of Kansas City's establishment.
You know, on Sunday, I went down to Berkeley Riverfront and they had an art fair down there. And there was music and vendors and all this activity. They got a stadium coming in. But I think I have a memory of there being a lot of things that went along that were built along the river. And it's fascinating how much has changed over the years, which is basically what you're documenting is a day that Kansas City used to really roar in a different way.
Indeed. It's definitely, they're a product of their time. Even though I have just written them all recently, they still tell this history of what this neighborhood used to look like or what kind of people were there. It's, I don't want to say it's almost like archaeology, but kind of, because we are urban explorers, as in we are exploring, this past of, Kansas City's early establishment, what this neighborhood was like, just, yeah, that kind of thing.
So we kind of talked a little bit the other day because I used to get into the city and really try to go in and see places. I went to Union Station, probably shouldn't have gone in, but I was going in when they were rehabbing it. And it was interesting because you told me you don't break in, but if there's something open, voila, that's kind of the philosophy.
Right. I mean, you'd be surprised how many, just back doors are left open. Yeah, it is not my goal to add to what is already wrong with the building, because I am merely just a finger on the hand of, the people who see the insides of these places. And many of them do have ulterior motives, like scrap metal thieves. But for me, it's about the history and getting it before it's gone.
So how many books do you have now?
I have five, but three of those five are about Kansas City, and the other one is about Picher, Oklahoma, and Eastern Kansas.
So did you reach out to the people on the show and let them know that they inspired you to do this?
No, I actually, yes, I did. I tried to find, like, there was only one season of this show, Forgotten Planet, and it took me some digging and digging, but I found like just the company that produced this series and, wrote them, hey, thanks for doing this. I know it totally sounds silly, but it's like, thanks for, putting on this show, because this led to me writing five books and traveling through 7 states in the Midwest just to document, forgotten places, city or out in the country. And I never heard a response or anything, but that letter is out there in the universe.
I mean, I would think that anybody that has a pulse that would get that, they would have to feel good that it spurns such a positive, momentous force to illuminate what they were already doing, and you're doing it more local here in KC.
I hope it did make somebody feel good, whether I got a response or not, because that idea, that show, I mean, was just like the brainchild that started all of this within me.
That's wonderful. So talk to me a little bit about, what you're doing is you're collecting memories of like ghosts in quotes, so to speak. Do you collect a lot of memories yourself? Are you someone that gets sentimental? How did this sentimentality get into you?
I have always been a sentimental person. I've loved taking pictures of my school friends from grade school on up. So I've always just had a camera in my hand. I've always been curious about people and places. And so, yeah, I guess it's more of I happen to be a curious person with a camera in my hand.
What's been one of the coolest things you've either photographed or an artifact you've gotten from somewhere in the world?
Ooh, wow. There's so many. I Picture Oklahoma. I've, once again started there, but I've returned there a number of times, and each time it is less and less. So there's not as much to see as there was, but um, Picture Oklahoma is just such a sad story of one tragedy after another. And as for artifacts, if there is something kind of on the ground, I will take little things off the ground. Um, I'll have to say it's probably some of the creepy dolls that I've collected.
So in the annals of Kansas City history, which you're capturing a lot of relics from the heyday, so to speak, If you could go back in time and witness one place or one event while it was happening actually natively, where would you go? What would you want to see that was happening here?
Okay, this is a very, very small place and it's in my favorite neighborhood, but there's a place on the corner of like 19th and Vine, and it used to be called Old Kentucky Barbecue. And it was the home and birthplace of Kansas City barbecue under Henry Perry. And I mean, we're talking back in like 1917, a little bit before that and stuff, but basically the establishment of Kansas City barbecue today. And like looking back at historical ads, like he used to cook up everything from possum, raccoon to pork, and people came from all over. And of course, this was a historically Black neighborhood, but there would be white people that would, traveling salesmen that would get some of his barbecue for the road and everything. So I'd like to see if Old Kentucky Barbecue, is kind of like Joe's today, where there's a line around the building. There's so many people waiting, and exactly what his process was, what young Arthur Bryantson Gates looked like back in the day. So, yeah, I guess the Old Kentucky Barbecue would probably be a place that I wish I could see in its full heyday back then.
One of the things that intrigued me by what you were doing, I mean, there's so many facets. I've lived in Kansas City my whole life, but the Jazz District, there was so many things that really put this town on the map because of the music that was being produced. What are some interesting, along with the barbecue, what are some other interesting revelations that you discovered about that district?
Really, it's such an interesting place because historically, Black people were kind of forced, not kind of, they were forced in this neighborhood because, it just wasn't the best area. And they really did so much good. Like, there's like the Eblon Theater was there, and Count Basie used to perform there. There was some of the first Black businesses of the area that really helped the Black community, with business establishment and future businesses of their own. Now, this came much later, but like Parade Park is also like a housing community in that area, which was established back in the 60s, 70s, and that helped the Black community get into home ownership. So, even though it may not be a wild, crazy story, there's just all these little stories that have fallen under the radar that has helped this community and made it the interesting place that it is today.
What's one of the favorite places that you've taken pictures of and covered and put in your book that you've gone to?
Ooh, that one I'd have to say it's a middle school. It was called Paul Robeson Middle School. And before it was a middle school, it was a Jewish community center. So there's a little more to it than just a regular school with like an auditorium and a gym. This one goes on to have like a swimming pool, racquetball courts, a gymnastics gymnasium, as well as just a regular gym. So, but what makes it great is besides the interesting layout of this place, it is just every time I go there, and I've gone there countless times over the last 8 years, and every time it's something different. It's always something new to see, whether it's a new piece of graffiti art or unfortunately new vandalism. There's always just something different every time I go.
So, as the author of these books, what has this process done for you and your appreciation or understanding of this town?
Oh, wow. There's really just so much that I've learned, just from the early establishment of how the neighborhoods that are neighborhoods today, like this Black neighborhood, this Hispanic neighborhood, how historically those neighborhoods were established. So I do have an understanding of how like Armourdale and Argentine became the Hispanic neighborhoods that they are today, and how like 18th and Vine became the Black historic neighborhood that it is today. And also going back to 18th and Vine, that neighborhood has such a sensitive place in my heart because in this I've grown to know over my time of exploring that neighborhood and getting to know the history is that yes, it was a historically Black neighborhood because that's where the Black community was told to live at that time, but how they've just made this neighborhood historically great over the years, but now there are changes going on there that are starting to change that neighborhood. And some will say for the better, but yes, maybe for infrastructure it is better, but for the people of that neighborhood, it's not so much better because they're being forced out of their neighborhood by all these improvements and the growing city.
It almost mimics nature. When you see a big swath of land getting taken over, all the animals get displaced.
Exactly. And with the cost of just living here increasing and increasing, where are those residents to go once, their neighborhood is too expensive to live in, and everywhere else is growing in expenses as well. So this is now starting, are we going to add to the homeless problem? Because now we have displaced people who can't afford to even live in the city that they've lived in their whole lives.
So your first book had to be quite magnanimous, your introduction to this series. What were the first places that you really wanted to explore, take pictures of, and expose to people?
Wheatley Provident Hospital is not too far from that neighborhood. And I found that story so amazing because this was a time in like the early 1900s when we weren't the full 50 states. But at that time, Black people weren't allowed to have the same education as white people. And this Wheatley Provident Hospital was educating and accrediting Black doctors and nurses. And they were the hospital for their neighborhood. And then with time, they ended up adding on to their original building. And the second part of the building that they added was the first pediatric ward in the whole country at the time. So
Wow.
pediatric care started with Black nurses in Kansas City, accredited Black nurses in Kansas City. And they are the template for pediatric care in this country today. And when I found that out, I was just blown away because, I mean, wow, pediatric care started with a group that faced such adversity at the time and still do, but at the time they faced such adversity and education wasn't a relevant thing for them. So they just achieved, taking care of themselves, being educated, and starting a whole new form of care for people all across the country.
That's the thing that I find interesting about all of this that I was asking before about, shining a light on things that no one really understands that happened. I mean, historically speaking, this town incubates so many hidden stories, and you're uncovering those in the process.
Yeah, I mean, everybody knows about the gangster days of Kansas City and the big stories of like Charlie Parker and, just big things that happen here. But there's these little tiny stories that really do fall through the cracks of history. And that's a shame that these stories, I can't get them all, but I'm definitely going to try to bring up what I can to make sure that these stories aren't forgotten.
What's been the response? What's been one of the more unexpected or the overall feeling of responses that you get back from the series?
I get a lot of responses that are really positive. There's some that have been like, why didn't you get in here? And it's like a lot of places I don't get to cover because of security factors or just I won't break in. It's just personally against my ethics to add to the damage that's already there. So there's besides, how come you didn't get this or that? That tends to be like the most negative thing I've ever heard, but everybody's like, oh, I remember this place, or oh, we used to go there when we were kids. And it's been reminiscent for a lot of people.
So, do you ever worry that, there's spirits and there's a vibe going on in these places that might either get disrupted or even enhanced, or the way it will play on you? Have you ever kind of encountered any of that?
I get asked this question so much, and I feel like I disappoint people because I've personally never had seen anything out of the ordinary. Um, so for me, I think I don't have experiences because I'm very closed off. I have an agenda. I'm usually on a time crunch because, how long can we be in here? Are we going to get caught and get in trouble, sort of a thing? So I just have an agenda of let's get what we can and let's get out. But I think also maybe if it's not me being closed off, I've just never had any negative experiences for the fact that I'm not there with an ulterior negative motive. I don't mean any harm. So I'm hoping that absolves me from any negative ghost activity.
Yeah, I would think so. I would definitely think so. So, what's the plan for this series? How long are you wanting? I mean, is this kind of like an indefinite time frame? What's your plan?
I currently am working on my sixth book, which will be another one about Kansas City. So this will make four about Kansas City. I don't know how many times I can go to the well. I'm definitely, this fourth time, yes. But beyond that, I'm not sure what the future holds.
Well, I mean, if you went to Oklahoma, could it be other cities, like regionally?
Um, there there are many other authors in this author group that writes for these series of books, and the surrounding areas around us are pretty much covered by a couple of other authors. So I would have to travel a little farther out of the Midwest to get something that hasn't already been covered by either me or one of the other authors that writes for Font Hill.
So, talk to me about the initial journey to getting your book published. Who's the publisher, and was it arduous? How did that happen?
Really, I was just doing a Facebook page, posting albums and pictures of, the places that I went just in the area. And at that time, it was just Kansas City, Kansas, Missouri. And then, of course, I did Picher, Oklahoma. And I had been doing this for a couple years when in 2019, I got approached. I thought it was just spam mail to tell you the truth, but I saw that they had some promotional pictures of people holding their books. So I just started contacting these people and was like, hey, is this legit? And it ended up being, yes, they were like, yeah, this guy's for real. It's not, a scam or anything. So I really just applied for the book by writing the back of the book, the about the author, and sent in just some sample pictures. And I was offered a book contract in which I do all the writing, I pick all the pictures and do the layout, but Font Hill basically just binds the book and puts it all together and then distributes it after that.
So, how's everything selling? How's it going?
I did really good when everybody was in lockdown, but my sales, now that life has kind of started going back to normal, 2022, people were getting back out, so people weren't home reading as much. So my sales did drop a little. However, it's never really, I mean, it's always about numbers for somebody, but for me, it was if I could just sell, just a small few and have a small handful of people of love it, then I have achieved.
So that's interesting. Did all of this begin during the pandemic?
Kind of, yes. It was the end of 2019 when everything started kind of taking place and I was accepted to write the book and then I was writing it. And then, 2020, everything started closing down. And that's when, my first one had already been out. My second one came out because I did that one like a couple months after the first one. And then when lockdown happened, I took advantage of that time to do more exploring because nobody was really out and around. And then I also took that time to write my fourth and fifth book.
That's interesting. It's like I keep hearing now that we're kind of coming out of the whole pandemic era and we're getting in the post-pandemic era. There's been so many silver linings. That would definitely have to be one that, sales went up and you had something to put your energy into.
Definitely. It was, I took advantage of just no people being around. In addition to doing some abandoned stuff during that time, I also went to all the busiest places in the city from, the river market to the plaza. And I photographed every place in the city completely just empty, no people. And it was so surreal. I felt like I was in some kind of post apocalyptic movie, and I felt like the city was mine for the taking. So, in addition to abandoned stuff, I do some city photography, but that was an interesting time because as the world was changing, it didn't really change too much for me because my husband was an essential worker. I was still going into the city to photograph abandoned places, and the only difference was there was just nobody around.
What a metaphor, though, for everything. I mean, the world was already empty, and you're documenting something that's empty. It's wild.
It truly was. It still seems surreal. Like, nah, that didn't happen. That was a dream because it seems like it was forever ago, but it really wasn't.
But it was so thick when we were in it. It was a quicksand.
It was. And we were all just waiting in this quicksand of uncertainty, and nobody really knew what was going on or how long this was going to happen. We were all just, even though we were in quicksand, we were just all up in the air with questions and uncertainty.
Well, Regina, I strongly urge everyone out there listening right now to definitely pick up your books and get involved with your photography and your creative world. That's fascinating. So to that end, tell everybody, where is the best place to see your work, get your books, anything revolving around your world?
I am on Facebook and Instagram under Red Vixen Photography. And then you can get my books anywhere locally. The Made in Kansas City stores do carry them. You can follow my pages where I post events and I sell books at events. And of course, Barnes and Noble, online, Walmart, Target, all of those places. So I'm kind of just everywhere and anywhere, and Facebook and Instagram.
Right on. Regina, hey, thank you very much for taking time out to talk about this project and your work. I love it. I appreciate it.
Well, thank you. I appreciate you and your time and this opportunity to come and speak about, a little bit of Kansas City history and promote myself while I was at it.
Thanks for tuning in to another famous interview with Joe Dimino, where we cover the world of art, literature, business, spirituality, music, and more from around the globe. If you want to hear more interviews, visit the Famous Interviews with Joe Dimino channel on YouTube. You can find us on Spotify and Apple Podcasts. Thanks again for listening, and until next time.